Hello everyone, my name is Swing Points and welcome to Outriders. And see all this here? This is all the notes I've been taking to make it so that I can give you accurate information in this video. What I'm going to teach you today, I'm going to teach you a lot about this game, but I'm going to teach you is how damage works in this game and how you can get an accurate idea of how much damage you're going to do and how these things work with each other so that when you're making your builds, you can make smart decisions. I want to understand why we do what we do when we make builds, right? I don't want to read something on Reddit and be like, oh yeah, this guy said this, so yeah, sure. This video is going to be all about teaching you how things work and why they work the way they do. And I'm going to keep it simple because it can get a little complicated, kind of needlessly complicated. But what we're going to do is we're going to break it down and we're going to keep it really, really simple so that you can understand it and then replicate it for yourself. Okay? So we're going to start real basic here with just what are weapons, how much damage they do, and then we're going to start factoring in attributes, mods, class tree, etc. And by the end of this, you'll understand so much more, but you won't be overwhelmed. Okay? So let's start real basic here. Take a look at our weapon. Our weapon here does 3,052 damage. That is a hard concrete number. It is not a calculation. It is literally just 3,052. And that number right there is what we start basing everything else off of. So what is everything else? It's this right here. It's this series of categories. Now, something you need to understand about weapon damage in this game is that it is all about categories and how they multiply with each other. All right? So you have a weapon damage bonus category, and there's a lot of different things that make up that category. You have a critical hit chance category, a critical damage category, a close range damage category, long range, and an armor pierce category. And you have a bunch of other categories down here. On top of that, you also have categories that are not listed here. For example, if I take a look at my helmet here, it increases damage dealt to enemies afflicted with bleed by 25%. You'll see in here, there's nothing that really represents that, but that is its own category. There is a mod category, and there's also a set category. And we'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later in the video. So we'll start real basic from the beginning, and we'll start factoring in more things, okay? So you have a weapon here, and we're going to assume that we're shooting an enemy point blank, okay? In the chest. Enemy point blank in the chest. So what's going to be factored there? It's going to be our weapon damage, and it's also going to be our close range damage, okay? So we would assume that we would do 3,052 damage to that enemy, okay? So now let's start changing that number. We'll go over to the class. So we'll go and we'll type in, or not type in, we'll click close range damage 15%, and then we'll also click weapon damage by 8%. All right, we'll come back here and we'll do the math. So you would take that 3,052 and you would increase it by 8% by multiplying it. So what does that actually look like? That would mean that you would take 3,052, right? And you would multiply it by 1.08. Because that is how you represent 8%. If you want to represent 10%, it'd be 1.10. If you want to represent 50%, it'd be 1.50. 63% would be 1.63, etc., etc. That's how you represent these numbers. So weapon damage bonus is its own category. So you multiply it out like this. Now, we also have close range damage because we would be shooting this enemy point blank. So you multiply again. And that's a really, really important thing with this game. You multiply again. So let's take a look here. It says close range damage is 15%. So you have our weapon damage, which was the 8%, but then you're also going to multiply again by 1.15 to represent that 15%. And now you might be asking, well, why don't you just go ahead and add 8 and 15 and then multiply it by 23%? Well, let me show you why it changes. And this is when a lot of people say multiplicative. It's this right here that I'm going to show you. So you see this number, 3790? Now let's go back a little bit and do the 23%. So if you go and you rewind and you try to do 23%, what you'll see is that 3790 just turned into a 3753. You just lost a bunch of damage there. And let me tell you, that really starts to add up. when you start getting really big numbers at the end of the game and you start multiplying a bunch of other things, you're losing a lot of percentage there. Reason being is, let's show you what that actually looks like. So 1.23 is 23%, right? Well, what happens if you take 15% and you multiply it by 8%? That's actually a 24.2% increase in damage, not just 23%. So this might be seeming really simple and like, okay, I did 6th grade math swing point, but the reason why this matters is because we're talking about categories. Categories are what multiply in this game, and there are subcategories, but it is the categories that are multiplicative. Not everything in this game is multiplicative. I thought it was, it is not. The categories are multiplicative. So weapon damage bonus is a category. Close range weapon damage bonus is a category. Bleed damage from your mods is a category. Now there's also a lot of subcategories, and we can talk about that a little bit, but I don't want to get too into it because it gets complicated. I just want to give you guys a general idea of how this stuff works. So let's keep talking about our categories here. One of the biggest categories in the game is a weapon damage bonus. So what goes into that category? A couple of things. One is our skill tree stuff in here. That will contribute to that category. If you have skill stuff that boost your weapon damage bonus, that will contribute to that category. And bonus firepower contributes to that category. That's a really, really important thing to note. It contributes to the weapon damage bonus category. It does not contribute to the base number. What do I mean by that? So you see here, you see this firepower thing? It says 80.5k plus 14.5k. That 80.5k is based off of your weapon. That number never changes. Ever. Never, ever. So it's a little confusing when you see things that say increases your firepower by 32,000. That's a lie. It does not work that way. You have your firepower based off of your weapon, and that's literally it. You take that 80.5, and then everything else is relative to that number. And if you don't believe me, I'll prove it to you. So let me clear this out right here, so we have nothing contributing here. Now, take a look here. We have our helmet, and its bonus firepower is about 8,000. And this here is about 80,000, right? So this is about 10%. So that would make sense. It would go ahead, and it provides about a 10% bonus. Now again, it is relative to the weapon. So now let's switch over to a weapon that has less firepower. We're going to keep the same helmet, but we're going to have less firepower. So this base number, that 80.5, is going to change. We'll click this guy. There's nothing else on here that contributes to weapon damage. It's literally just a weapon that has less firepower. You see how this went up? It's because 8,000 is a bigger percentage of 73,000 than it is of 80,000. So the percentage went up. Additional firepower is literally just a percentage. It's confusing, but it's literally just a percentage. So the amount of firepower you're getting, the amount of percentage bonus you're getting, is relative to the weapon you're using. And as a rule, you're still going to want to have a higher firepower weapon, because an 11% bonus off of 73 is still way less than a 10% bonus off of 80,000. And you can see it changing over here, this number. That's your proof of it over there. All right, so firepower is a category. Firepower is a category. So bonus firepower that you're getting is a category. And now there are subcategories when it comes to weapon damage bonus. For example, this is one of those complicated things where if you take a look here, it says weapon damage bonus is 8. And then if you take a look here, this provides a 10% weapon damage bonus, right? Because it's about 10% of this. So to make things complicated, you would not take 10% plus 8% and then just throw it into the weapon damage bonus category. Instead, what you do is you take 10% times 8%, and then that's what your weapon damage bonus is. It's not going to reflect accurately right here. It's just going to say 18. But the subcategory results in you multiplying this 10% by your skill tree, which again, a skill tree is a category. So you would take the skill tree category multiplied by the bonus firepower category. So 10% times 8% equals your weapon damage bonus. Don't worry about all that. You're just going to get confused. Just take this as a category in its own and then multiply that by your number over here, okay? It'll be way simpler if you just do that. But when I was referencing subcategories before, that's kind of what I meant. And there's a lot of subcategories in this game. So I hope you guys are still with me so far. Let's talk a little bit more about categories and let's recap what we've learned so far. So weapon damage bonus is a category. And things that contribute to weapon damage bonus include bonus firepower from your mods and your equipment, and then also from your skills. Those are the things that contribute to weapon damage bonus category. Now you also have a category of close range weapon damage, long range damage, armor pierce, etc., etc. Each one of these is a category. These are multiplicative of each other. Now let's add more categories. It only shows so many here, but there are more than just these for categories. For example, you take a look here, Tainted Blood. Increases the damage dealt to enemies afflicted with bleed by 25%. So that would be another category down here. Your damage increase when enemies are bleeding. Now let's talk about other categories here when it comes to mods, because this does get a little weird, and I think it's one of those things that's very important. So let me equip two other things here. We will take this bad boy right here, Bullet Kindling, and then we're also going to equip some shoes down here to kind of illustrate a point that I had learned while I was doing some research with all this. Bloody Boost. Perfect. So you know how I said there's categories? It gets very deep. So mods are their own category, but then there's also subcategories of the subcategory. So let's try to keep it simple here. If you have Tainted Blood equipped, you're going to increase your damage by 25%. So you would take whatever you got going on over here and then multiply it by 1.25, because that's how we represent 25%, right? Now, this is where it's a little weird. You would go, oh, well, maybe each mod is its own category. Okay, I can start doing multiplicative stuff. Yes and no. Okay, so let me illustrate this. So Tainted Blood is 25%, and Bloody Boost is 15%, both of when they're bleeding. So you would think, oh, okay, well then maybe I would go ahead and I would multiply by 1.25 for Tainted Blood, and then I would multiply by 1.15 for Bloody Boost, and that would get me a 43% damage boost. Nope, that's not how this one works. Instead, the way it works is you add those ones together, because status, bleed, mod is its own category. That makes sense. So you would add 25% plus 15%, and what you would get is only a 40% damage boost, right? So you would take 1.25 plus that extra 15%, which would be 0.15, right? So you get a 40% damage boost. Now, to make it more confusing though, and this is part of what you're learning with this video, is I'm going to show you another one here where you take a look at this. So Bullet Kindling, deal 20% more damage to enemies afflicted with burn. So same idea. These guys are afflicted by bleed. These guys are afflicted by burn. Well, for this one, you add the 25 and the 15% to get 40. So it's all status stuff. So maybe we would just add the 20% here. Nope, not how it works. The way it works is this gets multiplicative because it's its own category. It is burn mod category. So instead what you would do is let's take Tainted Blood and Bullet Kindling. What you would do is you would take 1.25 for Tainted Blood, and then you would multiply that one by 1.2. So the end result is that you're getting a 50% damage boost, where if it was additive, what you would be doing is you would just go plus 0.2, and it would only be a 45% damage boost. So really the point I'm trying to get across here is it's categories, 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 and there's so many different ways these categories split up. Some of the main ones are mod categories. So blood is its own category within mods, burn's its own category, toxic is its own category, all within the mod category. Reason why I say it's the mod category is because there's also a legendary category. So if you're familiar, and you know what, I'll even bring it up. I'll bring up my Devastator so you can see it. Here, right here's a really good example of it. So you see Tainted Blood? Well, we have Tainted Blood here, And we also have bloody boost, and we've already established that what you do is you add those two together to get a 40% damage boost because it's the blood mod category. The reason why I say it's the blood mod category is because there's also a blood set category. So this increases damage towards enemies afflicted with bleed by 50%. So since they are two different categories, they become multiplicative again, not additive. So if it was additive, you would just take 40% and 50%, and that would be a 90% damage boost. But instead, what you do, since they're different categories, is you take 1.4 to represent the 40%, and then you multiply it by 1.5 to represent the 50%. And instead of getting a 90% damage boost, you're actually getting a much larger damage boost. So I hope I haven't been too confusing so far. I just really want to drill this category point home because that is the essence of how all these things work together, is recognizing categories. So we talked about mod categories, we talked about how there's subcategories within mods, and we talked about how there's also legendary categories, there's skill categories, there's class tree categories. That's how these things become multiplicative, okay? So I think we kind of drove the category thing home. And one of the categories that is a little complicated, and I'll explain it to you, is armor piercing, right? How does armor piercing even work in this game? I use it and I get a damage bonus, but like I use 10% armor pierce, but I'm not getting a 10% damage bonus. So like, how does it actually work? And it's different on every single enemy. How does this actually work? Allow me to try to explain it to you here. There's two different types of armor in this game. There is physical armor, which is affected by armor pierce. And then there is anomaly armor, which is affected by resistance pierce. Every enemy in the game has a certain amount of armor that's physical and a certain amount of armor that's anomaly. So for example, let's take a regular human unit. It can be a marksman, it could be one of those grunts. We'll just go ahead and take a regular human unit. Each one of those human units reduces the amount of damage you do to them by about 25% because of their physical armor. So what that would mean is if you are doing 3052 damage, what you would do, since your damage is being reduced by 25%, is you would take 3052 and then you would multiply by 0.75. And you would get this number. This is what you're actually going to do to them. Now, it's not exactly 25%, but it's about 25% for these regular human units. So, how does armor piercing factor into this? Great question. If you have 10% armor piercing, what you are doing is you are making that 25% 10% less effective. Does that make sense? So what is 10% of 25%? 2.5. So at the end of it, you're only getting like a 2.5% damage boost. So how do we kind of illustrate that? So let's try this again. We'll bust out the calculator. So you have 3052 and you multiply by 0.75, right? That's about the number you're actually going to be doing because it's 25% of your damage is being erased by their armor. So how do we make 25% 10% less effective? What you'll do is you'll take 25% and you'll multiply it by 0.9 because you're getting rid of 10%. So instead what they're going to be doing is it's going to be reducing your damage by 22.5% instead of 25%, right? So if you want to figure out how you can multiply all that, you would take this number, 1 minus 0.225. That's the new number you multiply off of. So if we go back to our 3052, 3052, and then you multiply that by the number we just had, which is 0.775, you're now doing this much damage. See the difference there? So 2,365, opposed to before when we were only doing 2,289. So it's not a huge damage boost in this particular scenario because you're only making it 10% less effective against what is already a small number. Now, why would you ever care about armor piercing? Because different enemies have different levels of armor. The regular marksman grunt human unit only has 25% physical armor. But I got a big list of things here that'll give you an idea of how much some of these other units have. Okay? Let's take a look at this nice little area over here. And I'm just going to read some of these off. So regular humans reduce your damage by about 25%. Those bulky dudes with the shotguns that chase you around and then when you kill them, they drop a grenade. They have 75% damage reduction. Juggernaut captains have 85%. Cremators have 85%. Perforos, which is like those little red guys that chase you around, they only have 25%. The alpha perforos that charge you, they're 70%. The alpha perforos, when they use absorb skin, their 70% climbs to an 84%. Those dudes that charge at you with the hatchets and they're like, rah, 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 and there's usually 5 of them and they try to cut you down, those humans, they have 63% damage reduction. The venomous perforos have 65% damage reduction. And the crawlers, you know, like those really big dudes that come out and they like spit the obliterating beam and they like freeze you in place, or they have the overcharge thing that they bust out of their body. Those creepy monsters, they only have a 25% physical damage reduction. Now again, this is all physical damage. Now there's also elemental damage. And a lot of these units have way less elemental resistance or anomaly resistance. So allow me to read some of those off here. Regular humans only have 10% anomaly armor. Cremators only have a 10% anomaly armor. Perforos only have a 10% anomaly armor. Alpha perforos have a 30% anomaly armor. Those dudes that charge at you with the shotgun and then when they die, they drop a grenade, they have 0% anomaly armor. But specifically the breachers, there's a unit that's very similar to them called Bone Wreckers, and they still have a 10% damage reduction. But for some reason, the breachers have a 0% resistance, which is really, really weird. Other things to know about how resistances work, though, is that you will benefit your mod skills from resistance piercing. Moaning Winds here will perform better when resistance piercing is working for you. I don't know why they decided to do that, but your gun skills are affected by resistance piercing. You will do more damage with Moaning Winds if you have resistance piercing on your character. It has nothing to do with armor piercing, but it definitely has a lot to do with resistance piercing. So now let's kind of go back to how we were thinking about this before, right? So when we said that the initial humans, they have 25% damage reduction with their armor that they have, and then when you use armor piercing of 10%, that'll make that 2.5% less effective, right? Well, let's take a guy who has way more armor. Let's say he's reducing your damage by 85%. Well, if you're piercing through that, well, suddenly you're doing 8.5% more damage rather than just 2.5%. So armor piercing is a bigger deal on bosses and stronger enemies than it is on the weaker grunt units because they have more armor. And now I know I just read off a bunch of numbers here in terms of like how much percentage each one of these people have, like the physical armor and the resistance armor. There is one thing that's a little complicated that doesn't follow any of these rules, and that is this bad boy right in here. You take a look at your skills, and I'll flip on over to it. Anomaly rounds, twisted rounds. You see these bad boys? These do not follow the rules. They follow their own set of rules. So take a look here, what it does. Go to your skills. It increases your firepower by that amount, which again, that's a percentage. In fact, I can even show it to you. I can go ahead and get rid of this guy and then get rid of this guy. And then you take a look here, your weapon damage is only going up by a small percentage because firepower is a percentage. It goes under the weapon damage bonus percentage category. But it does something completely different that doesn't follow the rules. So if you were to be shooting, let's say, a cremator with a regular set of bullets coming out of your gun, typically what you would have to deal with is an 85% damage reduction because they have so much armor. Now, for some reason, these dudes, they use anomaly damage, but not the same way as your skills do. Allow me to explain. So let's say you want to attack a cremator, and they typically have a 10% resistance armor. So if you use Temporal Blade, you attack him, you're going to lose 10% of your damage, basically. Well, Anomaly rounds or twisted rounds only have a 3% damage reduction. So that's a really, really, really big deal when you consider you're shooting them with bullets. Because typically when you would shoot a cremator with physical bullets, you'd be losing 85% of your damage. Well, instead, when you're shooting them with twisted rounds, you're only losing 3% of your damage. Again, even less than your skills lose. For some reason, twisted rounds play by their own rules. For the majority of people that you're going to shoot, outside of like some weird captains, you're only losing 3% of your damage when you are using anomaly rounds or twisted rounds. It's very weird. So again, one of those things that we found out when we were doing testing, which is part of the reason why twisted rounds are so good. They're basically uninhibited by armor. All right, so we just went through a lot here, so let me recap in case you're like, and you're a little lost. So let's start from the scratch here. Now that you understand categories, you take your weapon damage here, 3052, and then you multiply it by categories. Weapon damage bonus category, you multiply that by the close range weapon category if you're up close. And then you have other things in here like tainted blood. These are their own categories. So you multiply it by 1.25 for tainted blood. And then you would multiply it by, you know, something different if you have another category in here, such as bullet kindling. Then you'd also multiply that by 1.2. You multiply things by categories, right? And then after you get through multiplying everything by categories, then you factor in armor. And then once you do all that, that is the amount of damage you're doing. Pretty simple. Now, there's a lot of different subcategories, and we talked about a few of them. Like, in terms of weapon damage bonus, there's, you know, increase your weapon damage, but then bonus firepower. Those are subcategories that kind of multiply with each other, but ultimately they all kind of come together in the weapon damage bonus category. And then, you know, we also talked about the subcategories of the blood versus the burn, but they're both mods. So, like, tainted blood along with bloody boost, they're a category together, but for some reason, you know, burn status is its own category. So you would multiply blood by burn, but you would add blood with blood. And then we also talked about how there's legendary set categories, there's skill set categories, mod set categories. So since there's a mod set category for blood, you would multiply it by the legendary set category for blood. So it's all about the categories, but really all you end up doing is you take a base amount of damage and then you multiply and multiply and multiply and multiply, and that is how you end up getting the amount of damage that you're going to do. And there's a lot of different things that affect that. That can be, I mean, there's other things like status effects such as vulnerable. There's some of the things that the pyromancer can do to increase your damage. One thing I do think I kind of found, which I don't really, it was kind of inconsistent, but I do feel like there's a stagger damage in this game. Like if you walk up to an enemy and you kind of topple them and they're like, whoa, sometimes you do more damage to them. So you can look at that if you're going to go ahead and test these things yourself. But keep in mind, if enemies are staggered, it does seem like they take a little bit more damage. One other thing about all this is if you've ever played with the cycle, there's a mod in here called the cycle. Let me see if I can find it. Don't trust it. I don't believe it. I tried testing out the cycle and getting numbers to work and all that, and I don't think the cycle reports properly, and I think it grossly overestimates how much it helps you. The cycle's awesome, and I do like it, and it does help a lot, but I also feel like it doesn't help as much as you think it does. I think this is one of those mods that they gotta fix. It grossly overstates how much it helps you, and some people that run like Devastator builds with Tremor will use this. Sometimes if you run it with Blood Potion, you can get some benefits out of it. But I definitely think the cycle is not accurately reporting how much it helps your weapon damage. And another thing, speaking of damage, we're just kind of going off one-off things here. You see the fortress here? Make sure you read it properly. Receive up to 43% damage based off of your armor. Meaning you're capping out at a 43% damage boost. You're not taking 43% of your armor and then adding that to your damage. It is literally you get up to a 43% damage bonus. So I don't know what number you got to hit with your armor in order to get that 43% damage boost. But what I can tell you is a lot of people use this weapon in endgame, and you have more than enough armor to make it so you're getting the full 43%. So really just look at Fortress as a 43% damage boost to all damage. Just like Tainted Blood is a 25% damage boost to all damage you dish out as long as they're bleeding, whereas firepower is really only for your weapon. There, so I know I talked a lot and covered a lot of different things. I hope I kept it pretty simple though. Pretty much all you do is you take your number and then you multiply it by a bunch of different things that are affecting it, and then you run it through the armor filter. And once you do all that, you got a pretty good idea of how much damage you're gonna do. So I hope you learned a thing or two. I hope you learned a little bit more about some of the intricacies that do go into the damage numbers. I think that's really interesting stuff that you don't know unless you test it yourself. Go ahead and spread this information because I tested it to the bone and I know this works the way that it works. It's not just a guess. So if you enjoyed this stuff or you found this content helpful, please go ahead, consider subscribing, consider visiting our Twitch streams. We stream just about every single day on twitch.tv/swingpoint. I'd love to see you guys there. If you guys have any other information about damage that I didn't cover, or you feel like I didn't cover accurately, let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say, or if you just have questions, let me see if I can answer them for you. And again, thank you guys so much for being here. I hope this video is helpful. I hope it's helpful to the community, and I hope that it helps you make better builds. So thank you guys so much. You guys are the best, and then I'll see you in the next video that we do around here.